Good morning, I'm Wayworn Worm, and welcome to my channel. Welcome back to Fires of Nilfgaard, Episode 4, The Meeting. Just a minute, Calmast said to the people at the door. He then pointed at Gwenifer, then to the door to suggest that she answered it. Finally, he pointed to each of the rest of them and their weapons with a finger to his lips. Adalbert nodded. The plan was clear from his point of view. Calmast was suggesting that Gwenifer answer the door, and the rest of them have their weapons ready just in case that they were needed. Everyone quietly got up and got their weapons ready as Gwenifer got ready to answer the door. She went to the door and opened it up just enough to peer out. There were two well-dressed men who were dressed as clearly servants. One of them began to talk. "Good morning, travelers. Your presence is requested by Lady Sibylla. Her ladyship is aware you are investigating the child kidnappings and wishes to aid you." Gwenifer looked at the two men suspiciously. "And if we choose not to come with you?" The man sighed. "Her ladyship would be most disappointed at the refusal of her aid." After a moment or two of consideration, which included looking back to the other servant, who seemed to agree with whatever was on his mind, he began to talk again. "Of course, you would be greatly compensated for your time." "How well compensated?" came Gwenifer's response. "We understand the amount to be 300 orens each," the servant replied to her. It looked like it pained him to say that, and it tipped Gwenifer off that something was not quite right. She wasn't sure what, though. These men came presenting an offer of aid from their lady to Gwenifer and her company, but they were willing to offer a very large sum of money at almost the first sign of doubt that her company would not accept this aid. She was intrigued by what this noblewoman could want with them, and while the sum might be extreme, it was still a large sum of money, and they could use all of it. There were many supplies that they could all use, and not only that, but she could grow her stock just as they reached the most devastated areas. There was no downside to at least the money. To keep up appearances, she pretended to think it over for several seconds more before finally answering, "Yes, we'll pay your lady a visit." The two men looked visibly relieved when she said that, but, to their credit, that look only flashed across their faces before they went back to being consummate professionals once more. They both bowed deeply before the first one began talking once again. "Thank you. Lady Sibylla will be most pleased to hear it. You can visit her at her manor at your earliest convenience." With that and another deep bow, the two men turned on their heels and headed toward the stairs as if to leave. Gwenifer shut the door and looked at the rest of the group. "Well, apparently we're going to Lady Sibylla's manor. Thoughts?" Calmast sheathed his sword, looking perturbed. "I don't like it. There's something off." Gwenifer nodded. "That crossed my mind. What about it did you not like?" "The money." Lella snorted at his response before he had a chance to elaborate. Calmast shot daggers at her, then continued. "We're essentially mercenaries. I know you like to picture us as a small trading company, and I'm not saying that we're not also that, but the bulk of our money and skill is in mercenary work. In a normal transaction, there are two things that go into deciding how much to offer for a job before bargaining even begins. The first, and most important factor, is the reputation of the mercenaries you are hiring. Rolled into reputation is the size of the company and their arms and armor and skills and all of that, but especially those last few things, they contribute toward reputation. We don't have the reputation to command a fee of more than about 100 orens total, let alone 1,500 orens total. The next is how dangerous the job is. This is also related to reputation and size of the company, because those alter how dangerous a job is for any given company. A job where the danger level would come even close to 1,500 orens is so far beyond what we can do, no one would offer us such a job. Then why would we be offered such a fee, Culmast? Runderin asked in her deep voice. Instead of answering, Adalbert jumped in. So we wouldn't negotiate. Either they don't expect us to live long enough to collect the payment, and such payment would of course be on completion of the contract, or they're so desperate for something that price isn't an option. 300 orens each. That is enough that no one in our position would think of declining. He motioned toward Gwenifer. Case in point, our fearless leader who haggles every deal that she goes into and is a hell of a merchant because of it, didn't even think of haggling with them. She pretended to think about their offer, then accepted it at face value. Whatever her reasons, Lady Sibylla wants us to accept her offer because she either does not think we will live long enough to collect and therefore doesn't care how much she offers, or she's so desperate for our help she doesn't care how much she offers as long as whatever it is happens. Gwenifer nodded. That seems like a reasonable idea, Adalbert. She looked over to Culmast. Is that what you're going to say? Culmast shrugged his shoulders. More or less, but there's only one way to find out, and that's to go to her manor. With that, the company prepared themselves for the day and walked out into Ashburg. The town still stunk to high heaven, but it seemed to be better this morning than it was the day before. Maybe they were just getting used to the smell, which was a thought that disturbed most of them at least slightly. Finding Lady Sibylla's manor was not that difficult in the relatively small town. It was one of the largest buildings, second only to the Lord's Manor, which was not too far away from Lady Sibylla's. While the Lord's Manor had the main town square directly in front of it, Lady Sibylla's manor was a couple blocks away, almost to the edge of town. Instead of having a town square in front of it, the manor they were going toward had a small gated garden in front. The iron and stone fence that surrounded the garden was clearly mostly for decoration, especially since it didn't go all the way around the house, just the front. But the iron seemed strong and was actually pointed at the top. It was at least semi-functional. On the other side of the gate, there was a guard posted, and as the company came close to the gate, the guard opened it and motioned for them to go in. Partway down the cobblestone path going directly from the gate to the front door, they were met by a man who was clearly a butler major domo of some kind, and brought into the house. Welcome, welcome. We're so glad you all came, and came with haste. It reflects well on you, of course. He smiled at them as he said that, and led them through the house. Presently, he stepped in front of a door that opened into a sitting room. Please, do wait here while I inform her ladyship that you have arrived. She will be most thrilled. Each member of the company took a seat in the spacious, well-appointed room. There was a fire in the fireplace that was providing most of the warmth and light to the room. The curtains on the windows were drawn to the perfect amount to both let in good light while still looking very decorative. They were left in the room alone for several minutes, and most of the group became some level of uncomfortable. Gwenifer didn't, of course. She grew up used to this whole come and wait thing. It was a classic power play where the noble let the peasant know how little regard they held them in. Culmast also didn't become uncomfortable. Having been raised as a minor noble, he was used to how long things like accepting guests took. Finally, a tall, stern woman, dressed very well but understated, swept into the room. From the doorway, she took in each member of the company one by one. As she did so, they all stood up and bowed or curtsied to her. Her stance and body language seemed to almost give off physical chills as she stood in the doorway a moment longer. Adalbert seemed to even imagine the fire dying down slightly in response to her. Gwenifer had a very different take on the woman, however. She was convinced that this woman was not almost glacially cold, but in fact greatly worried. Lady Sibylla eventually moved out of the doorway and allowed the doors to be closed behind her as she took a place of prominence and authority in the sitting room. Once she was seated, she briefly motioned for everyone else to resume their seats, which they did without hesitation. "I'm so glad you decided to come. I'll get straight down to business. My son Adalbert was kidnapped last night from his bedroom. The window and wall were smashed open, and his room is in shambles. I heard you were investigating this beastly kidnapper, and so I sent for you. I'm willing to not only pay, but I will furnish 2 of my personal guards to aid you with this beast." "Thank you," Gwenifer began. She briefly looked at each member of her company for any immediate objections. Seeing none, she continued. "I believe we can take this. In fact, this may be exactly what we needed. I know that this is difficult for you to hear, but we came here late to the game, and there are only several day-old scenes that we were able to get limited information from. With a fresh case, we might be able to follow the beast back to the hideout and confront it there." A look that Gwenifer couldn't encapsulate, couldn't discern, fell over Lady Sibylla's face for a moment. "But of course. Please, I will call for my 2 guards, and they will show you to Adalbert's room." Thank you so much for listening to episode 4 of Fires from Nilfgaard. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for my latest and hopefully for quite a while last new series called Tales from Oberth.